At our family reunion, I walked in smiling, only for my aunt to sneer, "We didn't think you'd show after all your failures." The laughter cut deeper than any knife. I knew whose smile I'd erase first. Imagine a family gathering, a day meant for joy, but for me, Lucas, it became a public execution. My own aunt, with a venomous smile, didn't just insult me, she exposed my deepest vulnerabilities to everyone, twisting my past into a weapon to shame my parents and declare me a failure. But what she didn't realize was that in that moment of ultimate betrayal, she wasn't breaking me, she was forging the steel for a comeback she would never, ever see coming. For years, family reunions were a special kind of hell for me. You know that feeling? That mix of obligation and pure dread? On one hand, yeah, it was supposed to be about catching up, laughing with cousins, eating way too much. But on the other, there was this undercurrent, this dark side, ruled by a few relatives who treated every single achievement like a competition. Every job, every car, every life choice was silently weighed, measured, and compared. It was like they couldn't just be together. Someone always had to be deemed less than. I usually tried to be the quiet one, keeping my head down, smiling politely, and making my escape as soon as humanly possible. But this year? Oh, this year was different. This year, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered, and the cruel, ugly truth of how they really saw me came spilling out. When I pulled into the park that day, I actually felt a flicker of hope. I'd been grinding, you know? Nothing flashy, no headlines, but I had a steady job. I'd finally clawed my way out from under a mountain of debt that had been crushing me for years. And I was even thinking about moving into a better place soon. They were small wins, sure, but they were my wins, and they mattered to me. I walked across the grass, a bowl of pasta salad clutched in my hands, trying to plaster on a convincing smile before wading into the sea of familiar faces. The air was thick with the smell of grilled burgers and sunscreen. Kids were shrieking with water balloons, and my uncle's booming laugh bounced off the picnic tables. For a split second, it almost felt normal. Then it happened. The moment that just stuck. As I got closer to the cluster of folding chairs under the pavilion, my Aunt Denise spotted me. Denise. She'd always been sharp-tongued, the kind of person who genuinely believed her cutting remarks were just being honest. In reality, they felt like daggers. She looked me up and down, her lips curling into this tight, sneering smirk. Then, loud enough for everyone within earshot to hear, she declared, "Well, look who decided to crawl out of the woodwork. We didn't think you'd show your face here after all your failures." The laughter that followed wasn't just hers. My cousins let out awkward chuckles. My uncle, the booming laugher, gave a low whistle. Even a couple of distant relatives I barely recognized smiled nervously, as if joining in was the safest option, better than becoming the next target. My own smile froze. My grip on that pasta salad bowl tightened until my knuckles turned white, and I honestly thought it might shatter. It wasn't just the words, it was the timing, the public spectacle, the way she made my very presence into a punchline. For a heart-stopping second, I wanted to vanish, to just dissolve into thin air. My heart was pounding, and I could feel that old, familiar shame, the one that had shadowed me for years when life hadn't gone according to plan, creeping back in. But then, something shifted. Instead of shrinking, instead of retreating into myself, a different thought, cold and hard, planted itself in my mind. No, I wasn't going to let this pass. Not this time. Not anymore. I set the bowl down on the nearest table, forcing my face into a neutral mask. Inside, though, it was a storm gathering strength. Denise's smirk lingered, almost like she was checking to see if her jab had landed. She wanted me to flinch, to hang my head, to confirm the narrative she'd painstakingly built about me, the one where I was always behind, always the black sheep, always her convenient joke. But I didn't. I just pulled out a chair, sat down quietly, and started making small talk with one of my cousins, as if absolutely nothing had happened. I could still feel Denise's eyes burning into me, waiting for the reaction she craved. When she didn't get it, she clicked her tongue and, with a dismissive huff, turned back to her circle. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, that she just gave up. But of course, she didn't. That little exchange was just the opening shot in what became a long, agonizing afternoon of subtle digs, pointed comparisons, and innocent remarks, all circling back to the same theme, Lucas, the one who hadn't measured up. Every time someone asked about work, Denise would make this dramatic show of sighing and declare, "Well, not everyone can be successful, I suppose." When my cousin Eric mentioned he was buying a new car, she glanced at me and asked, Still driving that old thing, Lucas? Even when the conversation had absolutely nothing to do with me, she'd find a way to twist it, to turn it into a reminder of where she thought I stood. And all the while, that laugh of hers, sharp, dismissive, carrying just enough weight to make others awkwardly join in, rang in my ears. I won't lie, it hurt. It always had. For years, I had let people like her dictate how I saw myself. Every time I stumbled, their voices echoed louder in my head than my own. But sitting there that day, feeling the sting of her words, the burn of public embarrassment, I also felt something else, a strange, cold clarity. If Denise wanted me to be the family joke, fine. But I had my own plans, ones she couldn't even begin to imagine. And that smug smile she flashed whenever she thought she had me cornered? That was the first thing I decided I was going to erase. And that's where it truly began. Because as much as Denise loved the spotlight, she had no idea that the show she was putting on was laying the perfect groundwork for what was coming next. As the afternoons stretched on, the weight of Denise's words hung in the air like an oppressive humidity that just wouldn't break. It didn't matter how many polite conversations I tried to steer myself into. Somehow, the current always looped back around, dragging me into the spotlight I never asked for. And every single time, Denise was the one nudging it forward, her voice slicing through the air like a conductor's baton, making sure everyone remembered the pathetic role I was supposed to play in our family's narrative. It started small, just comments slipped in between bites of potato salad. When my cousin Eric mentioned his new promotion, Denise clapped her hands and gushed, "Now that's what I like to see. Someone moving up in the world." Not everyone can say that, of course. Her eyes flicked toward me, as casually as someone brushing lint off their shirt, but the message hit me like a brick. A few people chuckled, and I noticed how heads tilted ever so slightly in my direction, waiting to see if I'd take the bait. I didn't. Instead, I took a long, slow sip of lemonade and forced myself to smile. My silence was starting to irritate her. I could see it in the way her nose twitched when her barbs didn't quite land. But Denise wasn't finished. At one point, while the kids were running wild with water balloons and a few adults were setting up a volleyball net, my aunt decided it was the perfect time to launch into one of her favorite games, family comparisons. She always framed them as harmless fun, but everyone knew better. "Let's see," she said loudly, clapping her hands to gather attention. "We've got Eric, who's doing so well at his new job. Did you hear they're considering him for a management role already? Then there's Rebecca, top of her class at university, practically guaranteed a scholarship for grad school. And of course, little Thomas, already winning medals in track and field. Oh, we have such talented people in this family." She paused dramatically, letting the words hang in the air, before turning her gaze squarely on me. "And then, well, Lucas is here too." The group erupted into laughter. Not malicious from everyone, but uneasy, forced laughter, the kind people make when they don't know whether to push back or just join in. Denise, of course, laughed the loudest, as though she'd just delivered the funniest joke of the day. My chest tightened, and I had to clench my jaw to stop myself from snapping. I wanted to remind her that I wasn't unemployed, that I had been climbing my own quiet path, that my life wasn't hers to measure out in teaspoons of disappointment. But I held my tongue. Not because I didn't have the words, but because something inside me told me to wait. She was digging her own grave, and I was going to make sure she buried herself in it. By dinner time, things had somehow gotten worse. My uncle grilled burgers and hot dogs, and we all lined up buffet style. When I finally got to the front, Denise swooped in behind me, her voice sharp and deliberate. "Oh, don't take too much, Lucas. You know, until you get your life figured out, maybe it's best to leave the big plates to the ones earning them." I froze with the tongs in my hand, the metal clinking against the pan as everyone within earshot turned to look. A couple of teenagers snickered, and one of my cousins muttered, "That's cold," under his breath. Denise just smiled sweetly, as if she'd said something caring rather than utterly cruel. My appetite vanished. I set my plate down, half full, the food tasting like sawdust when I tried to force it down later. But the final straw that day wasn't even about me directly. It was about my parents. My mom and dad had always been supportive, even if they didn't flaunt it. They were quieter, more reserved than the rest of the family. And because of that, Denise often treated them like afterthoughts. As we were all sitting around finishing dinner, she leaned back in her chair, patted her stomach, and said, "Well, at least most of us have raised successful children. Some people, I guess, just didn't know how to instill ambition." The air went dead still. My mom lowered her fork slowly, her lips tightening, and my dad's shoulders stiffened. They didn't say a word, but I saw the hurt flash across their faces. It wasn't just about me anymore. She was insulting them too, undermining the effort and love they had poured into raising me. My hands curled into fists in my lap, nails biting into my palms. Every fiber of my being wanted to lash out, to make her choke on her smugness, but I stayed quiet, staring at the fading sunlight beyond the pavilion, because something had shifted again. Denise thought she had won. She thought she turned me into the running joke of the reunion, another story for her to retell later with a satisfied smirk. But what she didn't realize was that every cruel word, every backhanded jab, every laugh at my expense was etching itself into my memory. Not as shame, but as fuel. She was giving me all the kindling I needed. And while everyone else might have thought it was just another year of Denise being Denise, I knew better. I was already planning. Quietly. Carefully. And when the time came, it wouldn't just be a comeback. It would be something she never saw coming. And then, the microphone crackled. My uncle had set up a small PA system for the annual family announcements, where people would share milestones, engagements, graduations, promotions. Denise's eyes lit up as she practically strutted toward it, grabbing the mic like she was about to deliver the State of the Union address. She glanced around, scanning the crowd, and I swear her eyes locked on me for half a second before she smiled wider. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice ringing out across the park. This year has been incredible for so many of us. Eric's promotion, Rebecca's scholarship, Thomas's athletic success. Oh, I could go on. Truly, our family is full of achievers. And of course, we're all so grateful for the support of each other. Well, most of us anyway. She let that hang, the corners of her mouth twitching as murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt something in me snap. And that was the precise moment I realized Denise had just handed me the perfect stage. The microphone in Denise's hand wasn't just a prop, it was a weapon, and she knew exactly how to wield it. Her voice, sharp and confident, carried across the park as if the entire reunion were her personal stage. I sat there, frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears, trying to predict where she would take it next. The jabs earlier in the day had been cruel enough, but what she did next would carve a line in the sand, one that I could never step back from. She tapped the microphone twice, like she wanted to make sure every single person was paying attention, and then she said, "You know, it's funny how families work. Some of us thrive, build real lives, real success. And some of us." She paused, her eyes sweeping the pavilion until they landed squarely on me. "Well, some of us just can't seem to get it together, no matter how much help they've been given." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. That silence, that awful compliance, it just gave her courage. She smiled thinly and went on, her words cutting deeper with every syllable. "Now, I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I think we should be honest about where we stand. Lucas, dear, why don't you come up here and tell everyone what exactly you've been doing with yourself lately? We'd all love to know what keeps you so busy." For a second, I thought I must have misheard her. Surely, she wouldn't put me on the spot like that. Not in front of 50 people. Not after the way she'd already cornered me throughout the day. But no, she was dead serious. I could see the gleam in her eyes, the anticipation of watching me squirm, stutter, and fail under the weight of everyone's gaze. I stayed seated, gripping the edge of the picnic bench so hard my knuckles turned white. My mom whispered my name softly, almost as if she were trying to protect me with nothing but her voice. But Denise wasn't finished. She leaned closer to the mic, her voice dropping into that falsely sympathetic tone she used when she wanted to twist the knife. "Or maybe I should help him out," she said, since he's too shy to admit it. "You see, while Eric's been climbing the ladder at work and Rebecca's preparing for grad school, our dear Lucas has been, well, let's just say between opportunities. Still working odd jobs, still trying to figure out where he fits in this world. Isn't that right?" A low ripple of laughter spread through the group, nervous, but undeniable. I felt my chest tighten, heat rushing up my neck. She wasn't just mocking me now. She was exposing me, stripping away every ounce of dignity I had left in front of the entire family. But then she went further. Too far. She turned her head slightly, as though confiding in the crowd, and added, "You know, it's such a shame. His parents sacrificed so much for him, college, tuition, rent, even paying off that little mess with his credit card debt a few years ago. And this is the thanks they get. I suppose some people just can't carry the weight of responsibility." The words hit like a physical blow. My jaw dropped, and I heard my mom gasp beside me. That was supposed to be private, something no one outside of my immediate family even knew about. My parents had helped me when I was drowning, and I had worked tirelessly since then to repay them, to rebuild my life brick by brick. And now Denise had taken that moment of vulnerability, that raw chapter of my past, and weaponized it in front of every single person I shared blood with. My dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. But before he could speak, Denise's voice cut through again. "Oh, don't look at me like that," she said, still smiling. "We're family. Families are supposed to be open, right? Besides, maybe a little tough love will finally light a fire under him." The crowd was dead silent now. No more nervous laughter. A few cousins looked at me with wide eyes. Others looked down at their plates. I could feel the pity radiating off of them, and somehow that felt worse than the laughter had. My parents' faces were stricken, and I knew they were blaming themselves for not stepping in sooner, for not shielding me from her venom. But inside me, something hardened. It wasn't just humiliation anymore. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal, so sharp, so undeniable that it cleaved straight through the shame and left only resolve. She had taken my past struggles, twisted them, and broadcast them like a trophy for her own ego. She wanted to define me by my lowest points, to etch that image permanently into the minds of everyone present. But what she didn't understand was that betrayal has a funny way of waking you up, of reminding you exactly who someone is and exactly why they can never be trusted again. I sat there staring at Denise as she handed the microphone back to my uncle, her smirk wide and satisfied, like she had just won some invisible war. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. And I was going to make sure she remembered this day, not as the one where she broke me, but as the one where she set in motion the downfall she never saw coming. And just as I thought the humiliation was over, Denise leaned across the table as she passed me on her way back to her seat and whispered, "You'll thank me one day." I didn't move. I didn't blink. But inside, a plan was already forming, one careful piece at a time. The rest of the reunion passed in a blur I could barely process. Conversations hummed around me. Laughter floated through the air. But I felt like I was sealed inside a glass box, cut off from everything. Every sound was muffled, every face slightly distorted. Denise's words replayed in my head on an endless loop, her voice booming into the microphone, her little aside about my parents, her smug whisper as she walked past me. The more I thought about it, the heavier it pressed down until even lifting my fork to eat felt like a chore. People avoided my gaze after that. A few cousins gave me sympathetic smiles, but most looked away quickly, not wanting to get dragged into the awkwardness. I caught snippets of whispers. "Did you know about that?" I had no idea. Poor guy. It was worse than open mockery. Pity was something I couldn't stomach. It stripped me down, made me feel like a child again, fragile and incapable. I excused myself before dessert and wandered off toward the edge of the park. The sun had started dipping behind the trees, painting everything in amber light, but I didn't even notice the beauty of it. I sat on a bench under the oak trees and stared at the ground, trying to breathe past the knot in my throat. It wasn't just the humiliation anymore. It was the betrayal. Denise had torn open something private, something raw, and paraded it around like a badge of honor. She had dragged my parents into it, too, shaming them in front of everyone when they had done nothing but love me through my worst moments. I thought about my mom's face when Denise revealed the debt she'd helped me through. How her lips had parted in shock, how her eyes had darted toward me in silent apology. I thought about my dad's chair scraping back as he tried to intervene, only to be drowned out by Denise's smug voice. They didn't deserve that. None of us did. The weight of it all came crashing down at once. My chest ached, my stomach churned, and I felt hollow, a failure. Exactly what Denise had painted me as. I thought about all the times I had tried to claw my way forward, late nights juggling 2 jobs, weekends spent studying for certifications, sacrifices nobody in that pavilion knew about. None of it seemed to matter now. Denise's words had drowned out years of effort in less than 5 minutes. I stayed out there for a long time, long enough that the smell of apple pie and ice cream drifted faintly on the wind, long enough to hear the squeals of kids as they packed up their water balloons for the day. Nobody came looking for me. Maybe they didn't notice I was gone. Or maybe they did and thought I needed space. Either way, I was alone. When I finally worked up the courage to walk back toward the pavilion, most of the family had begun packing up. Coolers were being lugged to cars, folding chairs stacked, leftover trays covered with foil. Denise was near the center, laughing as she helped wrap up food, acting as though nothing had happened. That somehow cut deeper than her cruelty. The ease with which she moved on, like she hadn't just dismantled me in front of everyone. I kept my head down as I helped my parents load our dishes into the trunk. They didn't say much, but I could feel the heaviness hanging between us. My mom finally reached out and squeezed my shoulder, her touch light but steady. "Don't let her words define you," she whispered. I nodded, but I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. The car ride home was silent. Streetlights flicked on one by one as we drove, casting fleeting shadows across the dashboard. I stared out the window, replaying every moment, every laugh, every sympathetic glance. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I felt like a shell of myself. I went straight to my room, closed the door, and sat in the dark, letting the weight settle. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how Denise had framed me, how she had branded me in the eyes of everyone present. I imagined the story she'd tell afterward, the way she'd twist the knife even deeper when she recounted poor Lucas at future gatherings. For a while, the despair felt endless, suffocating. I wanted to scream, to cry, to disappear. But somewhere in the stillness of those hours, my mind began to shift. It was subtle at first, just the faintest spark of defiance. The thought that maybe this didn't have to be the end of the story. Maybe Denise's attempt to humiliate me could be the very thing that set something else in motion. By dawn, as the first light crept through my curtains, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let it go. Not this time. She had crossed too many lines, dragged my parents through the mud, and branded me as a failure for sport. If I stayed quiet, if I accepted it, she'd only grow bolder. She'd make it her tradition to break me down at every reunion. So, I made a decision. I would suffer quietly for now, play the role she thought I'd been boxed into. But beneath the surface, I'd start planning carefully, patiently, because the one thing Denise never considered was that the person she thought was the weakest in the room might also be the one most willing to wait for the perfect moment. And as I sat there in the silence of my room, staring at the faint glow of morning, I realized something that made me sit up straighter. Denise hadn't just humiliated me. She had given me exactly the weapon I needed, her own arrogance, her insatiable need to control the narrative. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know when. But I promised myself, the next time the family gathered, the smile on her face would be the first one to vanish. In the weeks after the reunion, I carried Denise's words with me like a stone in my pocket. Heavy, unshakable, but also, strangely, grounding. Every time I started to feel the old doubt creep in, I'd hear her sneer echo in my head, still working odd jobs, still trying to figure it out. It hurt, yes, but it also lit a fire under me. For years, I'd been slowly, quietly putting one foot in front of the other. But now it felt like I had something bigger to prove, not just to her, but to myself. The first step was small, almost mundane. I'd been studying for a professional certification for months, but had always found an excuse to delay the exam. Not ready yet, I'd tell myself. Too busy this week. But the morning after the reunion, I sat at my desk, logged in, and registered for the earliest available test date. No more hiding, no more waiting. I studied harder than ever before. Late nights with coffee and textbooks, flashcards scattered across my desk like fallen leaves. By the time exam day came, I wasn't just ready, I was determined. And when the results came back, showing I had passed with one of the highest scores in my testing center, I felt something crack open inside me. It wasn't just relief. It was power. That certification unlocked a door. Within 2 months, I'd landed interviews at companies I'd only dreamed about before. I walked into those rooms with a quiet confidence, no longer weighed down by the narrative Denise had tried to saddle me with. When I finally got the job offer, a solid salary, great benefits, and clear room to grow, I sat in my car outside the office and let out a laugh I hadn't heard from myself in years. My parents were the first people I told. My mom cried, hugging me so tightly I could feel her pride in every heartbeat. My dad, normally reserved, clapped me on the back with a grin that lingered all night. For the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel like their son. I felt like someone they could brag about. With the new job came new stability. I moved into a nicer apartment, one with sunlight that poured through the windows in the morning and space enough for me to finally breathe. I traded in my old car for something reliable and sleek. Not extravagant, but enough to make me smile every time I turned the key. Week by week, the life Denise had mocked me for lacking began to take shape. But it wasn't just about money or material things. It was about the way I carried myself. I noticed it when I walked into a meeting at work and people actually listened when I spoke. I noticed it when I reconnected with an old friend and they said, "You seem different, more sure of yourself." And I noticed it most when I thought about the next reunion. Instead of dread, I felt anticipation. Not for the confrontation itself, but for the chance to show up as someone Denise couldn't dismiss so easily. Still, I kept quiet. I didn't broadcast my achievements on social media. Didn't call up cousins to brag. I wanted Denise to believe she still had me pegged. I wanted her to walk into that next gathering smug and unprepared. Because the sweetest revenge isn't loud, it's patient. The months rolled by, and with each one, my confidence grew. I earned praise from my manager. Even got tapped to lead a small team on a new project. The kind of responsibility that came with trust, the kind Denise always said I lacked. At night, I'd sometimes catch myself imagining the look on her face when she realized the failure she mocked had climbed further than she ever thought possible. But I didn't just focus on work. I started taking care of myself in other ways, too. I hit the gym regularly, not obsessively, but enough to feel stronger and healthier. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, like playing guitar and sketching, and found joy in the things that made me feel whole again. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. And then, one evening, I got a call that set the next phase in motion. It was my uncle, the same one who'd handed Denise the microphone at the reunion. He invited me to the next family gathering, a smaller one this time, at his house. "It won't be as big as the reunion," he said. "But you should come. It'll be good to see you." For a moment, my stomach clenched, remembering the humiliation of the last time. But then I looked around my apartment, the frame certification on the wall, the work laptop on my desk, the steady paycheck stubs stacked neatly in a drawer. And I realized I wasn't the same person who had walked into that pavilion months ago. This time, I had something Denise couldn't strip away. And as I hung up the phone, I felt it. The tide was turning. Slowly, steadily, I was rising. And Denise? She had no idea the ground beneath her was already beginning to shift. The invitation to my uncle's smaller gathering sat on my kitchen counter for days, like a test I wasn't sure I was ready to take. Every time I walked past it, I felt the echo of that reunion. Denise's sneer, her voice booming into the mic, the pitying glances from relatives. But alongside that memory was something new, a steadiness in my chest that hadn't been there before. I wasn't the same Lucas she thought she'd humiliated into silence. I had changed. And now I was starting to realize I had more leverage than I ever imagined. The night before the gathering, I stayed up late finishing a report for work. My team's project, one I'd been asked to lead just months into the job, was going to be presented to the executives the following week. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, and for the first time, it really struck me. I was in a position now where people listened to me, respected me, trusted me with responsibility. I wasn't between opportunities anymore. I had climbed higher than Denise would ever believe. And then something happened that would turn my quiet rise into the perfect setup for revenge. It started innocently enough, a conversation with my cousin Rebecca. She called me a few days before the gathering, catching up like we hadn't since the reunion. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly. "I should have said something when Aunt Denise went after you. It wasn't fair." I told her not to worry about it, that I understood why no one wanted to jump into the fire. But then she hesitated and lowered her voice. "Lucas, I don't know if you know this, but Aunt Denise has been talking about you a lot. Not just at the reunion. She's been spinning stories, saying you're still unemployed, still mooching off your parents, that you're a burden." The words made my jaw tighten, but I kept listening. Rebecca went on, "She even told some people you borrowed money from her once and never paid it back." That stopped me cold. "What?" "That's not true." "I know," Rebecca said quickly. "But she's been repeating it like it is. She loves making herself look like the martyr, you know, like she's the one holding the family together while everyone else falls short." I sat there in silence, anger simmering low and steady. Not only had Denise humiliated me in public, she'd continued to smear me behind my back, fabricating stories to reinforce the narrative she wanted everyone to believe. That wasn't just petty, it was calculated. And in that moment, something inside me shifted again. If she wanted to play with lies, fine. I had something she didn't, the truth. And the truth, paired with the position I was in now, could become a blade sharp enough to cut through every facade she had built. The next week at work, that thought stayed with me. I was surrounded by people who valued facts, numbers, results. Proof. And proof was exactly what I could gather. I dug into old bank records, emails, documents, anything that painted the real story of the years she loved to weaponize against me. Not only did I have clear evidence that I'd never borrowed a dime from Denise, but I also had records of the money I'd repaid my parents, every installment carefully logged. My past wasn't perfect, but it wasn't hers to distort. And I suddenly realized just how powerful it would be to hold up the receipts, literally, when the time was right. But the setup didn't stop there. At the office, my manager pulled me aside after a presentation and said, "You've got a knack for this, Lucas. You should consider applying for the open supervisor position. You're already doing the work." My heart thudded. A promotion already? I hadn't expected it so soon, but the possibility planted itself firmly in my mind. If it happened, it would give me even more stability, more presence, more undeniable proof that I wasn't who Denise said I was. Meanwhile, Rebecca and I started talking more often. She wasn't just sympathetic, she was genuinely angry at how Denise treated me. "She's always been like this," Rebecca admitted one evening. "She builds herself up by tearing others down. But the family only lets her because no one wants to cross her." That sentence echoed in my head. No one wanted to cross her. That was the secret to Denise's power, fear. She had cultivated it for years, throwing her weight around, humiliating whoever she pleased, and everyone else chose silence to keep the peace. But peace bought at the price of truth was nothing but control. I realized then that I didn't just want to clear my name. I wanted to break that pattern. I wanted to show everyone that Denise wasn't untouchable, that her power was built on smoke and mirrors. The gathering at my uncle's was just days away. And as I stood in front of my bathroom mirror the morning of, adjusting the collar of my freshly pressed shirt, I felt something I hadn't before any family event. Anticipation. Not the anxious, stomach-churning kind, but the focused, deliberate kind. I was walking in with proof, with stability, with success that no amount of Denise's lies could erase. And for the first time, I wasn't going to let her dictate the story, because Denise had given me the perfect setup without even realizing it. Her arrogance, her lies, her hunger for control, it had all painted a target on her back, and I was the one holding the bow. The morning of my uncle's gathering, I woke up with that peculiar stillness that comes before a storm. Not the kind of storm that tears through with violence and chaos, but the kind that rolls in slow, deliberate, inevitable. I ironed my shirt, polished my shoes, and tucked a slim folder into my bag before leaving the apartment. Inside that folder were printouts of bank statements, repayment records, and work documents, receipts for every lie Denise had ever spun. I didn't know if I'd use them, but just knowing I had them gave me a sense of armor. When I arrived at my uncle's house, the atmosphere was smaller, more intimate than the reunion. No massive pavilion, no PA system, just cousins lounging on the deck, aunts and uncles milling around the kitchen, and kids racing through the backyard with sparklers. Even though it was still daylight, I took a breath before stepping inside, reminding myself of one simple truth. I wasn't here as the family scapegoat anymore. I was here as someone in control. Of course, Denise spotted me almost immediately. She was by the kitchen island, wine glass in hand, holding court with a couple of relatives who were nodding along as she told some story. Her eyes flicked toward me, narrowed for a second, then curved into that familiar smile, the one that said she already thought she had the upper hand. "Well, look who decided to show up again," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the room. A few heads turned. I smiled calmly, stepping into the kitchen. "Good to see you too, Aunt Denise," I said evenly, my tone polite, measured. She wasn't expecting that. Her smile faltered for just a second before she recovered. "I was just telling everyone how resilient you are," she said with that syrupy tone she used when her words carried hidden barbs. "Even when life keeps knocking you down, you still come around. Admirable, really." A ripple of laughter followed, though this time it was weaker, less sure. I noticed the hesitation, like some of them were beginning to question whether joining her chorus was worth it. That was my first sign the ground beneath her was shifting. I didn't take the bait. I simply set down the bottle of wine I'd brought as a gift and joined a group at the table. I could feel her watching me, waiting for the old Lucas, the one who would shrink, flush red, and let her words hang heavy in the air. But I didn't. I talked easily with my cousins, asked about their lives, even cracked a joke or two. For the first time, I felt the balance tilting. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. After dinner, my uncle suggested we all share updates, just like at the reunion, but without the microphone. "It's nice to hear what everyone's been up to," he said. People nodded, and the circle of conversation began. Rebecca talked about grad school. Eric mentioned his promotion again. Others chimed in with small milestones, new jobs. New houses, engagements. Then Denise leaned back in her chair and, as if on cue, said, "And what about Lucas? Surely he's got something to share. Or maybe not much has changed since last time." The air tightened. I could feel the room collectively brace itself, waiting for me to stammer or retreat. But instead, I smiled calmly and said, "Actually, quite a lot has changed." I spoke clearly, steadily, not bragging, not defensive, just factual. I told them about passing my certification exam, about my new job, about leading a team at work, and the upcoming project I'd be presenting to executives. I mentioned moving into my new apartment, about the stability I'd built piece by piece. The words weren't boastful. They were measured, confident, undeniable. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, and then my uncle clapped his hands. "That's fantastic, Lucas," he said warmly. Others chimed in with congratulations. Genuine this time, not the polite nods of pity I'd gotten months before. My mom smiled, her eyes shining, and my dad gave me the kind of proud nod I'd waited years to see. But the best part was Denise's face. Her smile had frozen in place, brittle and strained, like a mask cracking at the edges. She hadn't expected this. She had built her entire narrative around the idea that I was stagnant, dependent, the family's perpetual disappointment. And here I was, calmly dismantling that story in front of everyone, replacing it with the truth. Still, she tried to claw it back. "Well, that's nice," she said with a forced laugh. "But I suppose we'll see how long it lasts this time. After all, some of us remember the debts, the setbacks." That was when I pulled the folder from my bag. I placed it on the table, sliding it toward her with a quiet precision that made every head turn. "Funny you mentioned that, Aunt Denise," I said softly. "Because I've heard you've been telling people I borrowed money from you and never paid it back, and that I'm still living off my parents. Since you seem so interested in my finances, I thought I'd bring some clarity." I opened the folder and spread out the documents. Bank records, repayment schedules, letters of clearance. Cold, hard proof that her stories were lies. "As you can see," I continued, keeping my voice calm, "I've repaid every cent my parents ever lent me. And as for you, well, since I've never borrowed money from you, there was nothing to repay in the first place." The silence that followed was electric. Denise's face flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. Eyes darted from the papers to her, then back to me. Rebecca leaned forward, reading one of the statements, and then looked up with raised brows. "It's all right here," she said simply. The shift was immediate. For years, Denise had thrived on the family's silence, on their willingness to take her words at face value. But now, for the first time, she was caught, exposed, and the room knew it. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands calmly. "I just wanted to clear that up since we're all about honesty in this family." And then I let the silence hang, giving her no escape, no clever retort to mask the truth. It was in that silence, in the way the family looked at her with new eyes, that I knew the revenge had landed. Not with shouting, not with anger, but with precision, with proof, with undeniable calm. And as Denise squirmed in her chair, cheeks burning, I felt something settle in me that had been absent for years: control. The silence after I laid the papers on the table stretched longer than I ever could have imagined. No one rushed to fill it with nervous laughter this time. No one looked away to protect Denise from embarrassment. For once, all eyes were on her. Not in admiration, not in compliance, but in cold, unflinching scrutiny. Denise shifted in her chair, her fingers tightening around her wine glass. Her face flushed crimson, and for the first time in my life, I saw her at a loss for words. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then gave a brittle laugh that cracked halfway through. "Well, I was only joking," she stammered, waving a hand at the documents like they were trivial. "Families exaggerate. You know how it is." But no one laughed with her. Rebecca leaned forward, her voice sharp. "It wasn't a joke when you told me he owed you money. It wasn't a joke when you called him a burden." Eric spoke next, surprising me. "You've been doing this for years, Aunt Denise. Always tearing people down. Maybe it's time you stopped." The weight of their words crushed her attempt at recovery. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. Even her husband sat stiffly beside her, staring down at his plate as though he wanted no part in the mess she'd made. For once, the performance was over. My uncle cleared his throat, his voice firm. "Denise, enough. We don't need this kind of poison in the family anymore." His tone carried finality, a kind of authority that silenced even the faintest murmur. Denise sputtered, rising to her feet. "Oh, So now I'm the villain after everything I've done for this family? Her voice cracked on the last word, desperation creeping in. She turned toward the door, muttering, "You're all ungrateful," before storming out of the room. The slam of the screen door echoed through the house like a gavel striking wood. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then my mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand, tears brimming in her eyes. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. My dad nodded, his jaw tight, but his expression proud. Slowly, conversations resumed, but the tone was different, warmer, more genuine. People asked me about my job, about my apartment, about what I wanted to do next. Not out of pity, but out of curiosity, out of respect. For the first time, I wasn't the family's running joke. I was simply part of the circle, no longer diminished by Denise's shadow. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Rebecca hugged me tightly. "She'll never forgive you," she said softly, almost with a laugh. "But that's her problem now." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "She doesn't have to forgive me," I said. "She just has to live with the truth." When I stepped outside into the cool night air, the stars stretched wide above me. And for the first time since that awful reunion, I felt free. Denise's power had always been built on lies, on the family's silence. But the moment the truth came into the light, her kingdom crumbled. And as I walked to my car, I realized something I would carry with me forever. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't fire or fury. It's calm, undeniable proof delivered at the perfect moment. The last image that stays with me isn't Denise storming out, red-faced and sputtering. It's the way the family looked at me after. The shift in their eyes, the recognition that I wasn't who she said I was. And that was enough. Because in the end, the smile I erased wasn't just hers. It was the smug grin she'd worn for years, the one built on my silence. And that night, for the first time, it was truly gone. What do you guys think? Have you ever had to stand up to someone like Aunt Denise in your own life? Tell me your stories in the comments below. I really want to know what you would have done.